The sun had just begun to pierce the horizon over the vast, sprawling Navy SEAL training base, casting long, sharp shadows over the obstacle courses and concrete drill grounds. The air was crisp, tinged with the metallic scent of the sea and the faint aroma of freshly oiled equipment. Overhead, the rhythmic clatter of boots against mats and the low hum of helicopter rotors created a background cadence, almost like a heartbeat, signaling the beginning of another grueling day. For 282 Navy SEALs, this was routine. Every morning, their bodies and minds were pushed to the edge in pursuit of perfection, discipline, and lethal efficiency. Among the assembled warriors moved someone who stood out without even trying. She was slight in build compared to some of the towering men around her, but every movement radiated controlled power. Her presence was calm, yet commanding, an invisible aura of confidence that drew the eyes of those nearby. Despite the competitive environment, she walked with ease, surveying the yard as though she owned every inch of it. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked over the assembled trainees, noting posture, positioning, even the subtle twitch of muscles. Every detail mattered to her, every distraction was a potential threat. This was not the first time she had walked onto a SEAL base, but it was the first time she had done so under the anticipation of a large-scale demonstration. The whispers were already spreading. Today, a special exercise was planned, a test of skill, strategy, and split-second decision-making. For the SEALs, these were moments of glory and fear in equal measure. The training staff moved through the group, adjusting equipment, marking positions on the course, and giving final instructions with clipped authority. Some of the younger trainees shot nervous glances at each other, knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. She paused briefly near the edge of the yard, hands clasped behind her back, observing the sea of men around her. Many of these warriors had years of experience, countless missions, and hardened resilience, but she could see the subtle undercurrents of tension. There was anticipation, curiosity, and in some, skepticism. Not everyone was convinced that a woman could match the intensity, speed, and brutality of a man trained to kill. That doubt had followed her through every assignment, every training drill, every mission. But she had long learned to ignore it, letting skill speak louder than words. Nearby, two trainees were already causing ripples in the air. They were tall, muscular, and exuded overconfidence, the kind that came from assuming dominance simply because they had size and a few months of experience on their side. They exchanged smirks and whispered to each other, glancing at her as if daring her to respond. The 282 SEALs around them didn't notice the brewing storm yet. They were focused on warm-ups, stretches, and mental preparation, but she saw it. A flicker of aggression in their eyes, the subtle shift in stance, the cocking of a shoulder for an attack, it was all there. Despite the provocation, she remained composed, her breathing even, her gaze steady. She had trained for moments like this, for situations where split-second judgment and precise action could mean the difference between control and chaos. Today was not just a test of physical skill, it was a test of patience, intelligence, and psychological acuity. She was fully aware that the two trainees seeking confrontation were reckless and dangerous in their arrogance, yet they had no idea what they were about to unleash. Around the yard, the energy was building. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the steel frames of the climbing rigs, the mud-stained obstacle courses, and the gleaming weapons racks along the periphery. Trainers shouted final commands, whistles pierced the air, and the SEALs adjusted their stances, readying themselves for the complex exercises ahead. Everyone's attention was drawn to the center of the yard, where she now stood, calm and collected, radiating authority. Even without speaking, she became the silent pivot around which the chaos would soon revolve. The murmurs began to grow among the trainees. "That's her," one whispered. "She doesn't look intimidating." "Wait until she moves," another muttered. They had seen her reputation, heard the stories of her missions, but nothing could prepare them for witnessing it firsthand. And as she took a step forward, her eyes scanning the field with predatory focus, the first stirrings of tension, like the pull before a storm, swept across the yard. The two aggressive trainees locked eyes with her, their smirks widening, convinced they had the upper hand. They had underestimated the silent, focused calm in her posture. Around them, the other 280 SEALs watched, sensing the subtle shift. Something was about to happen, and in that instant, the entire training yard seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable spark that would ignite a confrontation none would forget. The morning sun climbed higher, reflecting off the polished steel of the training equipment and casting harsh shadows over the obstacle course. The 282 Navy SEALs were now fully immersed in their drills, their bodies moving with practiced precision, sprinting, climbing, rolling, and engaging in close combat exercises. The air was thick with exertion, discipline, and a barely contained undercurrent of competition. Every footstep, every shout, every command reverberated across the yard. Yet amid the calculated chaos, two trainees had a different agenda. These two men, both taller and broader than most of their peers, had watched her since she arrived. Their confidence was not born of skill, but of ego and a sense of entitlement that often plagued rookies who had yet to face true consequences. Whispered insults had passed between them moments ago, invisible to most of the other SEALs, but clear to her sharp eyes. They moved with subtle aggression, testing boundaries, trying to provoke reactions that would disrupt her composure. Every tilt of a head, every deliberate step toward her, spoke of a challenge carefully planned yet reckless in execution. As she continued her warm-up, stretching her arms and rolling her shoulders, she remained aware of their movements. She didn't speak or glare, she didn't need to. Her calm demeanor was enough to make them pause for the briefest instant, but their arrogance was strong. They were used to asserting dominance through intimidation and assumed that a woman, even one with an impressive reputation, could be overpowered. They didn't know she had spent years hunting her mind as much as her body, mastering the art of reading people and exploiting weaknesses before the first blow was even thrown. The crowd of SEALs around her had begun to notice the tension, though most were too focused on their exercises to intervene. Subtle glances were exchanged, whispers passing from one trainee to another. "Do you see them? They're egging her on," said one. "They're asking for it," replied another, eyes fixed on the woman. Every detail was visible to the SEALs who had trained for years to read micro-expressions, body shifts, and pre-fight indicators. Even from a distance, the yard felt like it had become a stage, the drama silently building around the central figure of focus. The two men edged closer, adjusting their stances as if readying for a controlled attack. They had no intention of waiting for the structured exercise. They wanted a confrontation, a display of dominance and recognition in front of their peers. One stepped forward and jutted his shoulder, a subtle attempt to push her off balance. Another smirked and circled slightly, trying to flank her. To the untrained eye, their movements might have seemed inconsequential, but she read them like an open book. Each step, each hesitation, each shift of weight told a story of intent, and she cataloged it all, preparing herself. Around the perimeter, instructors noticed the shifting dynamic. A few began moving closer, ready to intervene if necessary. But even they paused, sensing that the tension itself was a teaching moment, a test of situational awareness, reflexes, and control. The woman's focus never wavered, her breathing remained steady, measured, almost meditative. She could feel the adrenaline building, not from fear, but from heightened awareness. She was ready. Every second that passed only sharpened her edge. Then subtle movements, tiny gestures designed to intimidate, were exchanged. The two men leaned in slightly, their eyes narrowing, while she remained motionless, almost statuesque, her gaze locked on theirs. There was no flinch, no step back, no sign of hesitation. It was a psychological duel before the physical clash. Around them, the SEALs felt the energy shift. The yard's usual rhythm faltered. Even the sounds of boots and commands seemed to quiet as anticipation crackled in the air. The provocateurs, sensing her calm, grew bolder. One let out a low chuckle, a taunting sound designed to break her composure. Another whispered something inaudible, likely a threat or challenge. The audacity was palpable, yet she remained unshaken. Every SEAL watching, 282 pairs of trained eyes, could sense that the balance had shifted, that the woman was not only aware of their intentions, but was already preparing a response. There would be no hesitation, no panic, only precise and controlled action. In that instant, the training yard became a crucible. The crowd of SEALs could almost feel the kinetic energy building, ready to explode. The two trainees had set the stage, and she was the calm eye of the storm, absorbing and analyzing every detail. She understood that one misstep could lead to chaos, humiliation, or injury, not just for herself, but for everyone around. And yet the inevitable clash was not a question of if, but when. The sun beat down on the yard, glinting off sweat, steel, and the intensity in every pair of eyes. All 282 SEALs were now on the edge of their seats, consciously or not, waiting for the moment that would turn whispers into gasps, tension into action, and a routine day of training into an unforgettable lesson in skill, discipline, and authority. The air on the training yard had grown taut, as though every breath of wind carried the weight of anticipation. The two aggressive trainees had closed the distance, circling like predators testing prey, each movement measured yet brimming with confidence. The rest of the 282 SEALs froze in near silence, sensing the spark of conflict that was about to ignite. This was no longer a mere training exercise. It had become a contest of wills, and all eyes were on the woman standing calm at the center. Her posture was steady, her breathing controlled, and her eyes locked on her would-be attackers. Then, without warning, they lunged. The first trainee aimed a double kick, targeting her midsection with brutal intent. Simultaneously, his partner struck from a different angle, attempting to overwhelm her through sheer force. The coordinated movement was textbook aggression, practiced yet reckless. The sound of boots striking the mat echoed like gunshots across the yard, and the gasps from nearby SEALs rippled like waves through the assembled crowd. For a split second, the world seemed suspended, and the trajectory of the attack seemed unstoppable. But she was ready. Years of training had honed her reflexes into something near instinctual. As the first kick came toward her, she pivoted with blinding speed, twisting her body mid-motion to absorb minimal impact. The second kick narrowly missed, grazing her shoulder, but she maintained perfect balance. Every eye in the yard followed her movements, some in disbelief. Even seasoned SEALs, trained to expect the unexpected, could not anticipate the precision with which she moved. The attack, meant to dominate and humiliate, had become a display of her unparalleled skill. In that instant, she assessed the angles, the strength, and the positioning of both men. Her mind worked like a machine, calculating leverage, weight distribution, and vulnerable points. There was no hesitation. She knew that a single misstep could escalate into injury beyond what was intended for training. Her body tensed, poised to respond not with brute force, but with calculated, surgical accuracy. The crowd of SEALs could almost feel her thought process: analyze, predict, execute. Her counterattack began with a subtle shift of weight to her right foot, a slight pivot that unbalanced the first attacker. Using his momentum against him, she swept her leg low and hard, connecting with both of his legs in a precision move she had mastered over years of combat training. The sound of bones cracking was sickening, yet controlled. The trainee collapsed instantly, stunned and immobilized. The second man tried to adjust, to strike again, but she anticipated his motion with a preternatural sense of timing. A second sweep executed with swift, perfect form brought the second aggressor to the ground. His knees buckled, and he hit the mat with a thud that echoed across the yard. The silence that followed was palpable. 282 pairs of eyes, trained to observe, analyze, and react, were wide with astonishment. No one moved, not even the instructors, as the gravity of what had just occurred sank in. The two men writhed in pain, incapable of continuing their assault, while she stood, composed, unbroken, and completely in control. The crowd began to murmur, then exhale collectively as the tension broke. Some SEALs whispered in awe, others shook their heads in disbelief. The two attackers, humiliated and incapacitated, could barely comprehend how quickly their confident plan had collapsed. She didn't gloat, didn't taunt. Her expression remained calm, her breathing steady. This was not about proving dominance. It was about discipline, precision, and demonstrating that skill, not arrogance, commanded respect. Instructors rushed forward, and medics assessed the two trainees, but even their intervention highlighted her control over the situation. She maintained her stance, arms relaxed but ready, eyes scanning the yard for any other threats or disruptions. Every step, every movement was measured, deliberate, and authoritative. The 282 SEALs who had witnessed the incident would remember the timing, the precision, and the mental fortitude displayed. It was a demonstration of combat mastery at its finest, a lesson that brute force alone was never enough. As the medics attended to the fallen men, whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Stories would be told, retold, and exaggerated, but the truth remained clear. She had faced a sudden, coordinated assault from two aggressive trainees, and she had neutralized the threat flawlessly. The atmosphere shifted. Awe replaced doubt, respect replaced skepticism, and the entire base recognized that she was not just a participant in the exercise, but a force to be reckoned with. In that brief but eternal moment, the yard had become a theater of mastery. Every trainee, every instructor, every observing SEAL understood that what had transpired was more than a clash of skill. It was a display of discipline, precision, and authority that few could ever match. The attack had failed spectacularly, not because of luck, but because she had anticipated, calculated, and executed with perfection. And as she stood there, breathing evenly, her eyes surveying the stunned crowd, it was clear. She had turned aggression into a lesson no one would soon forget. The dust and tension that had filled the training yard began to settle, though the echoes of the confrontation lingered. The two trainees lay sprawled on the mat, groaning softly as medics rushed to their side. The cracks of bones under her precise strikes had been audible to every SEAL present, and the weight of the moment had silenced the yard. No one moved immediately, unsure if more action was coming, yet none could deny what they had witnessed. A display of skill, speed, and control unlike anything they had ever seen. She remained standing, calm, poised, and alert, scanning the field with the eyes of someone trained to notice everything. Her breathing was measured, her stance relaxed but ready for any further threat. Even in the midst of chaos, her mind processed possibilities, contingencies, and outcomes. Around her, seals began to murmur, whispering to one another about the precision, timing, and technique of her movements. What could have escalated into a violent scene had instead become a perfect demonstration of discipline and control, and all of it executed in mere seconds. The medics moved quickly, kneeling beside the first trainee. They assessed his condition, stabilized him, and began moving him to a safer area. Despite the pain, he was conscious, though his eyes reflected a mixture of shock, regret, and newfound respect. The second trainee's reaction was similar. They had come into the situation believing dominance came from size and aggression, and they now lay humbled before the woman who had neutralized them with skill rather than brute force. Every movement of hers had been purposeful, every strike controlled, and every decision calculated. The crowd of seals began to react, first with gasps and whispers, then with nods of understanding. This wasn't merely a fight. It was a lesson in awareness, precision, and discipline. The entire training yard had become an impromptu classroom, and the lesson was clear. Arrogance and aggression could be countered decisively without chaos when skill and focus were applied. Trainees who had doubted her prowess now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect, some even taking mental notes for their own future exercises. Instructors approached cautiously, aware that even in training environments, situations could escalate rapidly. They observed her calm demeanor, noting how she maintained control over both the aggressors and the crowd. No one questioned her authority. Her mastery was evident in every movement, every calculated breath, every precise adjustment of stance. She spoke only once, her voice firm and measured, instructing the medics to stabilize the men and reminding the crowd to return to their designated positions. Every word carried authority, reinforced by the undeniable actions she had just executed. Her control of the situation extended beyond the immediate physical threat. She ensured that no one else attempted interference or escalation. Around her, seals began to absorb the significance of what they had witnessed. This was not just a display of combat ability, it was a demonstration of leadership under pressure, the ability to maintain calm while neutralizing a threat, and the importance of discipline over ego. It was a rare, teachable moment, and everyone in the yard felt its weight. The two aggressors, now stabilized, exchanged glances that conveyed more than words could. Pain mixed with humility, and somewhere in that shared gaze, they recognized their mistake. They had underestimated her, and the consequences had been immediate and unavoidable. The medics guided them toward a quieter area of the base to recover, their movements slow, awkward, and careful. She watched them leave, still alert, still maintaining the aura of focus and control that had defined her every action since she entered the yard. Even after the medics left, the silence lingered for a moment longer. The 282 SEALs, having witnessed the entire incident, began to process what had just occurred. Many exchanged glances, whispering in disbelief and admiration. Stories would circulate of this day for months, retold with increasing reverence for the precision, calm, and skill she had displayed. And in that moment, she didn't bask in attention or praise. Her focus remained on readiness, on awareness, on the next potential challenge. That was the true mark of her discipline, acknowledging achievement internally while maintaining outward composure and preparedness. Finally, the instructors called the group back to order, resuming the training routine. But the atmosphere had shifted. Where there had once been subtle doubt or skepticism, now there was undeniable respect. Trainees who might have ignored instructions now looked to her with admiration. The women on the base felt a renewed sense of empowerment, seeing a peer demonstrate mastery and authority in front of a crowd of elite warriors. She had not only defended herself, she had set an example, created a lesson, and earned recognition silently but definitively. By the end of the exercise, the yard returned to routine, but nothing had returned to normal. The two aggressors remained a cautionary tale. The crowd had absorbed a lesson in respect and discipline, and she continued her rounds with the same calm intensity. Her presence was no longer just acknowledged. It was commanding, undeniable, and transformative. The counterattack had ended, but the impact would last far longer, echoing in the minds of every SEAL who had witnessed it. By mid-morning, word of the confrontation had spread across the base like wildfire. Though the 282 Navy SEALs had already witnessed the incident, the retelling in hushed tones amplified every detail. The double kick, the lightning-fast counter, the controlled precision, and the absolute authority with which she had handled the two aggressors. Even the instructors and command staff, normally stoic and measured, found themselves nodding in quiet admiration as they reviewed the event in their minds. What could have been a chaotic, humiliating scene had instead become a textbook demonstration of skill, composure, and discipline. Commanders arrived at the training yard, moving briskly yet with palpable curiosity. Their eyes swept over the crowd, noting the whispers, the wide-eyed trainees, and of course the operative herself. She stood near the center of the yard, upright, calm, and alert, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Every movement carried the unmistakable air of authority, a controlled presence that commanded respect without the need for words. The two incapacitated trainees had been taken to the infirmary, and the yard had slowly resumed its usual rhythm, though the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. One of the senior instructors approached her first, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. He had witnessed countless exercises, many with high stakes, but he had never seen control executed with such precision and confidence. "That was extraordinary," he said, choosing his words carefully. "You didn't just defend yourself, you set the standard for this entire base." Her calm gaze met his. She acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod, careful not to overplay her accomplishment. Praise, after all, was secondary to discipline. Skill spoke louder than words, and she let her actions do the talking. The trainees who had watched her movements were now approaching, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Their curiosity was mingled with respect, and perhaps a touch of awe. Young operatives asked questions under the pretense of learning tactics, but their real intent was to understand how she had moved with such speed, anticipation, and control. She answered without condescension, demonstrating the discipline behind each movement, the hours of training required, and the mental focus necessary to remain calm under unexpected attack. Every answer reinforced the lesson. Arrogance and aggression could not withstand precision, preparation, and discipline. Even the two aggressors, now recovering in the infirmary, began to understand the significance of what had transpired. Their own arrogance had been their undoing, and the professional, composed way she had handled the confrontation left them humbled. The story of the day's events spread not only through the ranks, but beyond the yard itself, circulating among other units as an example of discipline and skill. Soon, she was being referenced in discussions about training methodology, leadership, and the role of female operatives in elite military units. Commanders called for a brief assembly. The operative stood at attention, the focus of a crowd that had been quietly buzzing with admiration. Medals, commendations, and formal recognition were mentioned, but she accepted them with humility. Her mind, as always, was focused on readiness and discipline, not the accolades. Even in receiving recognition, she maintained the aura of calm and authority that had defined her actions since arriving on the base. It was this composure, this mastery over both physical skill and psychological perception, that solidified her reputation among peers and superiors alike. Her actions also had an immediate impact on morale. Female operatives at the base found inspiration in her display of skill, courage, and authority, seeing in her an example that excellence transcended gender. Trainees, who might previously have doubted their own abilities, felt a renewed sense of possibility and determination. The lesson extended beyond combat. It was about confidence, preparation, and the importance of respecting every individual's capacity for skill, regardless of assumptions or stereotypes. Throughout the day, instructors and command staff discussed adjustments to training protocols inspired by her display. Lessons were drawn, strategies analyzed, and insights shared with other units. Her actions had transformed what was initially a minor incident into a major teaching moment. The training yard itself seemed subtly altered. The energy of those present had shifted from casual practice to heightened awareness and respect for precision, preparation, and composure under pressure. By evening, the story of her counterattack and its flawless execution had become legend on the base. SEALs recounted the events to one another, embellishing none of the crucial details, yet emphasizing the remarkable precision and control she had displayed. The operative, ever composed, returned to her routines, checking equipment, reviewing upcoming exercises, and preparing for the next challenge. Recognition, both formal and informal, had been received, but for her it was simply another day, another lesson in discipline, and another step in an ongoing journey toward excellence. The base had quieted down as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. The chaos of the day, the double kick, the counterattack, and the stunned reactions of 282 SEALs had settled into a hum of routine. Yet for her, the events lingered far longer than for anyone else. Alone in her quarters, she sat on the edge of her bunk, eyes fixed on the floor, hands resting on her knees. Her body ached slightly from the sudden movements and counterattacks, but her mind was alive with thought, reflection, and analysis. She replayed the sequence in her head, not with pride, but with meticulous examination. Each step she had taken, every pivot, sweep, and calculated strike was scrutinized for precision and efficiency. What went right? What could have been even sharper? She considered the speed of her responses, the positioning of her body, and the mental clarity that allowed her to neutralize two aggressive trainees simultaneously. The incident had not only tested her skill, it had tested her judgment, patience, and composure under extreme pressure. Her thoughts drifted back to the countless hours of training that had prepared her for moments like this. Waking before dawn, running drills through mud, scaling obstacle courses, practicing hand-to-hand combat for hours until her muscles burned with fatigue. Every bit of it had contributed to her ability to respond instinctively. She remembered instructors yelling corrections, fellow trainees pushing her limits, and the innumerable failures that had taught her resilience. None of it had been easy, and yet all of it had built the foundation for the moment she had just lived. She reflected not only on physical skill, but also on the mental discipline that had allowed her to remain calm while under attack. Fear, adrenaline, and instinct had all surged through her body in perfect alignment, guiding her movements. She thought about the two trainees who had attacked her, about the arrogance that had fueled them, and the lesson they had learned. Discipline, she realized, was more powerful than brute strength, awareness more effective than intimidation. In the arena of combat, mistakes were costly, and arrogance often met consequences swiftly and decisively. Her mind wandered further, considering the reactions of the 282 SEALs who had witnessed the event. She thought about the respect she had earned silently, without boasting, and the way her actions had inspired those around her. Women on the base, trainees and seasoned operatives alike, had seen proof that skill and discipline transcended expectations and stereotypes. She felt a quiet sense of responsibility, understanding that every move she made set an example for others. Leadership, she realized, was not about commanding attention. It was about embodying excellence consistently. Yet amid the reflection, she also confronted subtle frustrations. Some of the men had doubted her abilities before witnessing her response. Some would carry skepticism in their eyes, tempered only by grudging respect. That was human nature, she reminded herself. Ego and doubt were challenges every leader faced, and part of her discipline was learning to navigate both without letting them disrupt focus. She allowed herself a small, private smile, knowing that respect earned through action was far more enduring than respect demanded by position. Her thoughts turned inward as she contemplated the balance between training and real-life consequences. The day's events, while part of a controlled environment, had mimicked the intensity and unpredictability of real combat. Decisions had to be immediate, precise, and proportionate. Mistakes could have led to injury, humiliation, or escalation. She reflected on the weight of responsibility borne by every operative in her position. The need to act decisively while maintaining control, the imperative to lead by example, and the constant vigilance required to prevent chaos in moments of extreme stress. Finally, she allowed herself a moment of quiet gratitude. Gratitude for her training, for the mentors who had guided her, for the peers who pushed her limits, and even for the arrogance of the trainees who had challenged her. Every element of the day had contributed to a singular experience, a test of skill, composure, and presence of mind. She understood that this reflection was not an endpoint, but a step forward, a preparation for future challenges, and a reminder that mastery required constant evaluation, humility, and dedication. As night fell and the base settled into silence, she remained seated on the edge of her bunk, eyes closing briefly, but her mind active, replaying, learning, and preparing. She knew that what had occurred today was extraordinary, but she also knew it was only one moment in a career defined by vigilance, skill, and discipline. The reflection itself was a lesson. Mastery was not demonstrated solely in action, but in the ability to analyze, learn, and grow from every experience. And in that quiet, she reaffirmed her commitment to excellence, knowing that tomorrow would demand nothing less. Weeks had passed since the incident that had left two aggressive trainees incapacitated in front of 282 Navy SEALs. Yet the story of that day continued to ripple through the base, whispered in hallways, recounted between drills, and analyzed in strategy discussions. What had begun as a single, tense moment had grown into a legend. The operative's name was now spoken with reverence, her actions serving as an example of discipline, precision, and calm authority. New trainees arriving at the base were briefed not only on the rigorous training schedule, but on the story of the woman who had turned aggression into a lesson in skill and control. Her presence had transformed the culture of the unit. Male trainees who had once relied on size and intimidation now approached exercises with greater awareness, caution, and humility. Female operatives, some recently assigned and others long-serving, felt a surge of confidence. Here was proof that ability and discipline, not brute force or ego, commanded respect, even in the presence of hundreds of elite warriors. Many quietly adjusted their own training routines, inspired to push harder, refine technique, and cultivate the same level of mental clarity and composure she displayed effortlessly. Commanders and instructors also began to incorporate her demonstration into official training methodology. Workshops, seminars, and tactical discussions referenced the incident, breaking down her movement, decision-making, and execution. The exercise became a teaching moment for the entire base. How to neutralize threats efficiently, how to maintain authority in chaotic situations, and how to earn respect without resorting to aggression. Her calm professionalism became the benchmark, her precision a model, and her discipline an unspoken standard for every operative. She continued her duties with the same quiet intensity that had defined her approach all along. Every mission, every drill, and every encounter was executed with meticulous attention to detail. Her reputation had grown, but she remained humble, knowing that mastery was measured not by legend or recognition, but by consistency and readiness. Still, the effect on the unit was tangible. SEALs began to emulate her focus, trainees approached challenges with renewed seriousness, and women felt empowered to claim space and authority without hesitation. The two trainees who had challenged her eventually returned to regular exercises, but their mindset had shifted. Painful as their recovery had been, it had also been enlightening. They moved with more respect, listened attentively to commands, and engaged with peers more carefully. What had started as arrogance had been tempered into humility, and even they would one day recount the incident as a turning point, a moment when they learned firsthand that skill and composure always outweigh aggression and ego. Beyond the base, her story began to reach wider military circles. Visiting officers, instructors from other units, and even recruits at neighboring facilities heard accounts of the incident. It became an illustrative example of operational excellence, psychological awareness, and leadership under pressure. Her actions demonstrated that elite operatives were not defined solely by physical ability, but by mental discipline, tactical intelligence, and the courage to act decisively in unpredictable situations. The incident became a teaching tool, a benchmark for training programs, and a symbol of what professionalism and mastery truly looked like. In quiet moments, she reflected on the legacy she was leaving behind. Legacy, she knew, was not built on medals or stories alone. It was built on influence, on the example set for peers, subordinates, and even rivals. She understood that her actions, witnessed and internalized by hundreds, had shifted perceptions, elevated standards, and inspired others to push beyond doubt or hesitation. Leadership was subtle, she realized, often more about what one demonstrated through action than what one proclaimed through words. And in that realization, she felt both satisfaction and responsibility. Every decision from that day forward had the potential to reinforce or alter that legacy. The base itself seemed subtly changed. Exercises were now approached with heightened awareness, trainees trained with more precision, and instructors often referenced the lessons learned from that single extraordinary moment. She became a benchmark for excellence in every sense, a model of skill, authority, composure, and humility. Even in the most routine drills, her presence was felt, her example silently guiding behavior, inspiring growth, and maintaining standards that others would aspire to reach. As weeks turned to months, it became clear that her legacy was more than a story of confrontation. It was a transformation. She had demonstrated that true mastery involved more than physical ability. It required mental clarity, situational awareness, discipline, and unwavering composure. And in doing so, she had reshaped the environment around her, inspiring respect, empowering others, and setting a standard that would influence the base for years to come. The legend of that day, the double kick, and her flawless response became a permanent thread in the tapestry of the unit's history. A reminder of what discipline, skill, and leadership could achieve when executed with precision and calm authority. The sun was dipping low over the horizon, painting the SEAL training base in shades of orange and gold. The day's exercises had concluded, but the echoes of that pivotal incident, the double kick, the lightning-fast counterattack, the stunned reactions of 282 SEALs, still lingered in the minds of all who had witnessed it. For her, the day was like any other, yet beneath the calm exterior, she felt a quiet satisfaction. What had begun as an unexpected provocation had evolved into something far more meaningful, a lasting lesson in skill, composure, and authority. As she walked across the yard, inspecting equipment and observing trainees, she noted subtle shifts in the atmosphere. The women she passed carried themselves with greater confidence, moving with a sense of purpose and pride. Male trainees, once overly confident in brute strength, now approached exercises with respect, mindfulness, and strategic thinking. Even instructors adjusted their expectations, subtly weaving lessons from her actions into training routines. The base itself had changed, not in structure or schedule, but in culture, a culture of heightened awareness, mutual respect, and disciplined excellence. Her influence extended beyond mere observation. Junior operatives approached her for advice, not only on combat techniques but on mental preparation, situational awareness, and leadership. She taught with patience, offering insight into decision-making under pressure, emphasizing the importance of staying calm while evaluating threats, and showing that true authority is earned through skill, discipline, and integrity. Each conversation was a chance to instill lessons she had learned through years of rigorous training, countless missions, and of course, moments like the confrontation that had cemented her reputation. The two trainees who had attacked her had fully recovered physically, but their perception of skill, strength, and respect had been forever altered. They approached her now with deference, offering assistance when appropriate, and often reflecting quietly on the humbling lesson they had received. She did not seek acknowledgement or apologies. She simply observed, noting how discipline and competence had reshaped behavior. It was a subtle victory, one that spoke louder than words. Skill and composure demand respect, whether earned in combat or in a training yard. Beyond the base, her story had spread to other units. Visiting officers and instructors recounted the incident as a case study in mental fortitude, combat readiness, and leadership under pressure. The story was told again and again, evolving into a benchmark for training and evaluation. Her name became synonymous with precision, skill, and calm authority. For many, she was no longer merely an operative among elite warriors. She was a symbol of what could be achieved through dedication, discipline, and unwavering focus. Even in private reflection, she acknowledged the weight of her influence. Mastery, she realized, was not only about executing physical techniques flawlessly, it was also about shaping the environment around her. Leadership extended beyond commands. It involved setting a standard, inspiring others, and demonstrating the potential of human capability. That day, the double kick and her response had crystallized all those lessons into a single, unforgettable moment. It had been both a trial and a triumph, a chance to embody the principles she had trained to uphold. The sun continued its descent as she stood on the edge of the yard, looking out over the obstacle courses, climbing rigs, and scattered training equipment. The quiet hum of recovery drills and soft conversations filled the air. In that moment, she allowed herself a small, private smile. She had faced aggression and uncertainty, met it with skill and calm, and in doing so had created a lasting impact. Her legacy was not in medals, accolades, or recognition alone. It was in the culture she had shaped, the respect she had earned, and the lessons she had imparted. Night fell over the base, stars beginning to glimmer faintly above. She returned to her quarters, her mind already reviewing exercises, potential challenges, and future missions. Yet she carried with her the knowledge that what had transpired on that training yard would echo far beyond this day. Every trainee who had witnessed her mastery, every instructor who had observed her precision, every peer who had felt the shift in respect, would carry the lesson forward, and in that her influence endured. In the end, the operative's story was more than a single confrontation. It was a testament to discipline, skill, and the power of composure under pressure. It was proof that true mastery commands respect, inspires growth, and leaves a legacy that transcends the immediate moment. As she stood in the quiet darkness of her quarters, preparing for tomorrow's challenges, she knew that her actions had not only neutralized a threat, They had changed the environment, inspired others, and set a standard for what it meant to be a true warrior. And in that knowledge, she found quiet fulfillment, ready for whatever would come next.